Hey, what's up guys, it's BenBonk, and let me tell you a story. As you may know, I am making Slimekeep, a fast-paced roguelike where you have to kill and capture slimes to save the land. And Slimekeep has a fair amount of text. Now, normally this shouldn't be too much of an issue for games. However, the font that I settled on for all the text in Slimekeep is this pixelated font. When choosing it, I liked it because it was pretty simple and pixelated, and I thought it fit nicely with the art style and resolution of Slimekeep. Although the problem with this font is that it may be a bit too simple. You see, over time, I've gotten quite a few complaints from certain users who thought that this font was too hard to read, and I definitely see where they're coming from. I personally don't have too much of a problem with it in most instances, but my opinion doesn't really matter in this case, as I want to make sure that even if a small percent of people will have any trouble reading the font, they'll have an option to change it. The last thing that I would want is for people to have to miss out on the game's experience due to something as simple as a font. So I set off on a journey to alleviate this issue that at the time I did not realize would be one of the most frustrating and soul-crushing journeys I have ever been on in the over 3 years development of Slimekeep. Okay, let's get started. The plan was to make a simple checkbox in the settings menu of the game. This checkbox would allow for the player to switch all the text in the game to a more high-resolution font that would hopefully be considerably easier to read. With this plan in mind, I got straight to programming, and surprisingly, shortly after, I had a sort of working demo in place. Once checking this box, all the text in the game would convert to this placeholder high-resolution font. I mean, it wasn't pretty in the slightest, but it was a promising start. Or so I thought. You see, the issue with this system here is that all I was doing was simply looping through every single text object in the game and changing the text font to a different font. The problem here is that naturally, different fonts have different sizes and spacings. You can't always just change a font and expect the text to update how you intended. You need to accordingly adjust these other values. And so I did. Inside of this loop where I had previously updated all the fonts, I simply added this line to increase the font size by 10 when switching to the high-res font, and decrease it by 10 when switching back. Should have been a simple fix, right? Well, no. This change was my first mistake. You see, I can't just increase the font size by doing something like +10, -10 because it obviously won't scale correctly. Instead, I would need to multiply and divide this font value to ensure that everything would maintain its scaling. But before I could change that, I ran into another more serious issue. So if you don't know, Unity has a few methods for searching through objects in a scene. One of the most common ways to do this is through a method called findObjectsOfType. This method simply finds all the objects of a specified type, being text in my case, and returns them. Now, this would work fine, except by default, this method only returns objects that are active in a scene. And by nature, not all text objects in my game will be active at all times, so that was a bit of an issue. But thankfully, there was an easy solution. FindObjectsOfType has a parameter titled IncludeInactive, which you can simply set to true, and it'll include inactive objects in the search. Great. But when I tried doing this in my game, it only returned errors in the scripting, like this parameter didn't exist. Now, this really confused me, because I recalled using this method and parameter in the past, but it just didn't seem to work here for some reason. And then after a bit of research, I found the issue. It turns out that this parameter was only introduced in Unity 2020, and I am not on Unity 2020, but 2019.3. So I couldn't use this parameter and hence this method. And if you're screaming at me to update my Unity version, I get you, and I know I probably should have. But at the same time, I'm so late in development of this project that I wouldn't want to risk breaking anything by updating to a new version of Unity, which could change a bunch of stuff in the engine. And yeah, I have backups, so I could have experimented, but I guess it just seemed like a hassle at the time. Anyways, upon doing some research, I found another deprecated method called FindObjectsOfType all. And this method seemed promising because it would return inactive objects. Great. I implemented it into the search when changing the text, but wait, I didn't really read the complete documentation for this method before implementing and running it. And oh no, almost all the text in Slimekeep was broken. Like, really broken. You see, FindObjectsOfType all has a catch. Well, not really a catch, but its intended function. Sure, it can return inactive text objects, but it also returns more permanent stuff, like objects inside of prefabs in Unity. Now, I won't try to get too much more technical, because I know not everyone out there is a programmer or Unity user, but essentially, when I run a game inside of Unity, I can do whatever I want to the game inside of what we call play mode. I could literally delete every object in the game and we would be fine, because once I exit play mode, things are turned back to the state that they were in before I ran the game. But when using find objects of type all, well, I can permanently alter things that don't get reset once exiting play mode, such as all the individual room templates in the game and the text inside of them. So long story short, I made a few mistakes that would break a bunch of stuff that I couldn't so easily fix, forcing me to manually reset all of this broken text. So I then proceeded to spend the next few days literally just hacking away at the system. I tried to update the font and letter spacing accordingly and to make sure it would scale correctly, although things just weren't going my way at all. Anytime I would somehow make a mistake, either knowingly or not, tons of, if not all the text in Slimekeep would just permanently break, and I would have to go in one by one, reverting them to their original state. And boy, was I losing my mind. Now, I know at this point you're probably yelling at your screen again, thinking, why am I not just using version control, so I wouldn't have to manually do all this work again when I broke everything? And the answer is, I kind of was, but not really. I've had GitHub for a while now, and I've committed to a backup quite a few times over the years, but I've never really done much work in general reverting to previous versions of the game. So I tried to revert the game many times and back it up inside of GitHub, but I don't know, I just couldn't ever get it to work. And I know that sounds really embarrassing, and my lack of knowing how to use version control probably caused me so much pain throughout this whole ordeal, but I just want to be honest here, and I couldn't get it working for some reason, even after watching so many videos and looking stuff up. I eventually resorted to just creating zip backups of the game in an unbroken state to avoid this conflict, which kind of helped, but is definitely not ideal. So yeah, lesson learned, know how to use Git, I guess. Like, actually know how to use it and not just coast along like I was. Anyways, back to development, my current system just wasn't really working. So to take a different approach, I tried downloading a program called FontForge to directly edit this high resolution font to make it the same size as the normal one. So I wouldn't even have to mess with the size and spacing in code and could just have them seamlessly transition. And while this seemed promising, I just couldn't get to work either. I ended up going back to my old system that I'd spent days trying to get working, with no success, and tinkered around a bit more, but I'm sure you can guess how that went. At this point, I was lost. I had spent so long at this point on a simple checkbox option in the game that sure, was important, but I never guessed it would cause me so much pain. After much contemplation, I had to make the decision to scrap pretty much all the work I'd done up to this point. It was hard to do this, but if there's anything I've learned from game dev, it's that sometimes you have to kill your darlings. Which, okay, sounds pretty bad, but what I mean by this is just throw away something if it's not working and start fresh, even if that work has taken you a long time. It was a tough decision, but I realized that I probably wouldn't have gotten anywhere by continuing to hack away at it. So gone was that old code, and in was a new idea. Well, actually, it was rather similar to my previous attempt, but with one change that would prevent the possibility of me breaking everything. See, a lot of the problems I had with the old system was that I was multiplying and dividing the font size and spacing values. Let's say we have a normal piece of text here with a font size of 5. When I want to switch to the high resolution font, first I would obviously change the font. But oh no, now the text is too small. So then I would multiply that font size by, let's say, 2 to get it to be the right size. Then if I wanted to switch back to the normal font, I would switch fonts, but instead divide the font size by 2 instead of multiplying it. One issue here is that let's say I switch to the high resolution font and increase the font size to adjust accordingly. But now I stop running the game, and as you've learned, in some cases, this text change will be permanent, completely messing up future tests. Okay, so enough talk about problems, how do we fix this? Well, my solution was to make a text handler script of sorts that would replace on every single piece of text in the game. This script would contain two main functions. One to change the text to the high-res font, and one to change it back to the regular font. And the important part here is that I could store the desired values for every specific characteristic I may need in that text in the start method, eliminating the risk of potentially breaking the text in runtime. So I made this change and, well, yeah, the system actually worked. Okay, ignore the fact that initially some of the text was super high up and I had to change every single piece of text alignment to be centered manually, but whatever, it worked now and that's all that mattered. I couldn't believe it because it felt like I was hacking with the system for so long, continuously running into a wall, but then all I had to do was step back, rethink things, and the solution quickly followed. So yeah, now every piece of text in the game can be converted to what I call rich text, which I think looks great and obviously much more readable than the other default font. Okay, so overall, did I just spend 9 minutes talking about a goofy problem that probably would have taken an experienced programmer very little time to fix, and they probably wouldn't even have gotten themselves into this mess in the first place? Yeah. And did I maybe dramatize this whole situation a bit? Yeah. But I will say this experience has led to some of the most frustrating days of my 5-year game development career. I know this whole ordeal hasn't been pretty at all, and that, yeah, I made tons of dumb mistakes that I'm pretty embarrassed by, but these things happen in game dev, especially if you aren't too experienced like me, and I wanted to share them to you all. Just don't make the same mistakes I did, and make sure to use source control. But anyways, I know this video was a bit different than my normal devlogs, but I hope you liked it regardless. And if you think what I'm doing is neat, please consider subscribing and wishlisting the game on Steam. It really helps. Links are in the description. Also, if you don't know, I've got a pretty active Discord server where you can talk about game development, Slimekeep, or whatever you want, so consider checking that out also. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.